Okay, we're going to continue on a chapter that we left off without completing last week,
Right,
and so I'm just going to let you take off and go with it. We're going to talk about interesting people in Panola County.
right, and successful people that helped to build the county. We've had some comment on them this week. People that I've met have told little bits of information that I had not run across. It's been very interesting. These people that have developed the businesses of Carthage and Beckville and the other surrounding areas, a lot of people know them from their family traditions, you know. And mainly what I know is what I dig up in the various newspapers and books and so on. And I also talk to people about them. But we didn't get around to discussing Claude Pollard last time, and he's one of our real leaders, and I thought we ought to go back to him. We have Pollard Street in town, and Hamilton Pollard, his father, was a long-time county officer in this county, and Claude, from his youth, wanted to be a lawyer. And we talked about last time that the lawyers, in order to achieve the qualifications necessary to practice law, they apprenticed themselves to some lawyer. And so he did that, and he studied with the local lawyers and passed the bar exam. And he actually was a native born. Most of those early lawyers came here, you know, with the immigration. But he was born here. Hamilton Pollard was his father. He was born here in 1874. And in 1895, he passed the bar exam and set up law practice. Now, his father was very well-to-do and owned a lot of property on North St. Mary Street. And he gave each one of his children a lot for a home on North St. Mary. And Claude's home is still on that street. It's still.
This is the three-story house?
No, it's not the three-story one is the Tribune House.
That's correct.
And a two-story, and I don't know who owns that two-story house now. It's about two houses back toward town from the Tribune House. And it's kind of a square-looking house, I'd say, a two-story. And it still stands, and it is called the Pollard home.
Okay.
This is what Claude built on the lot given to him by his father. The other home sites are along that street, but they have other homes on them now. The main thing about Claude was that he went into a political career. See, he became an officer in this county first, county attorney, and served in that office. And usually it's a stepping up, you know, when they go into politics, and that's what it was with him. He was county attorney for 3 years, and then he got into the race for district attorney and was elected for 4 years, I believe, 2 terms, that he served as district attorney. And by then he was well enough known in the state that he was appointed Assistant Attorney General of Texas. And he served in that position 4 years. And in 1926, you see, years had been going with his various law practice in these local offices, and then his 4 years in Austin, and then he ran for the office himself of State Attorney General. And he, when you say that he beat James B. Allred, you know that he had to be pretty popular, because Mr. Allred was popular too. But he beat him in 1926, and then ran again in 28, and served 4 years all told as Texas Attorney General. And that's a pretty spectacular location for a country boy, which is what he was, really. And he had left Carthage, of course, to fill in all of these jobs in Austin. And when he went out of the Attorney General's office, he went with the railway company and the Managers Association of Railways, and was their legal authority for the rest of his career for the state of Texas. He lived until 1942 and never had come back to Carthage. They lived in Austin. And when he died, he's buried in the state cemetery in Austin because he was a state celebrity. We don't always realize that we have had people that have influenced the whole state, and he's one of those. So the Pollard name, you find it everywhere in documents in the courthouse because Hamilton Pollard was county clerk for a long time. Then a family that we have not talked about that is connected with so many people in this county is the Chadwick family. We had not brought up the Chadwicks, and I picked up Dr. Claude Simpson Chadwick's report or story on the Chadwicks, his ancestors. And the more I read, the more interested I became. He sent us this book a long time ago. Dr. Claude Chadwick grew up here, went to school here, and then went to college, university, and became a PhD. And his career was as a science professor in Vanderbilt. And he served out his profession and is retired in recent years at Vanderbilt University. And so he's in biology, a professor of biology. And he and his co-professors made some experiments that got write-ups in the national magazines. And so he's been very well known as a scientist. But it's his whole family that I thought we ought to talk about because they populated the area west of town, out 79, what we call 79, and also north of town, out 59. There were Chadwick families, and then scattered all between. And in this story, a collection that he wrote, that Claude Chadwick wrote, he reveals some traditions of the family that go all the way back to England. But we won't try to cover all of that. But the early generations that came to America is what we'll talk about a little bit. They settled in South Carolina, and then, like most of the immigrant families, the next generation moved on someplace else. So they went from South Carolina to Alabama, which was the usual trail that they followed. And some of them drifted on to Mississippi, and then the stories about Texas began to blossom everywhere. And the relatives in Mississippi wrote back to them in Alabama about how glorious it was in Texas, apparently. And so they came on to Texas. And this was just after the Civil War. Now, the story we'll pick up with the father of the ones that established homes here. The one that really brought his family here was Daniel Chadwick Sr., or he called him Squire Daniel. Squire, of course, referring to landholder, and they were great farmers and hard workers. In fact, he makes a statement in this book that after the slaves were freed, he almost made slaves of his children because he made them work so hard. But they accomplished a great deal. Now, Squire Daniel, as he called him, was a Confederate veteran from Alabama. And he had married there and had two sons, one born before the war started and one just after. And they stayed with her family, his wife's family, Bussey's, in Alabama, of course, while he was involved in the war. and he was what was called a teamster. Now, teamsters were very important parts of the Confederate Army because they supplied the supplies, so to speak. That meant food, clothing, whatever. And so they had to have it in wagons, so that was pretty slow. But when we go back through all this and go back to pioneer times, we realize they did a lot with wagons that we don't think we could do today, since we have fast-running big trucks and all this sort of thing. It's amazing how much ground they covered in what they had. But he did drive teams and delivered whatever the Army needed during the war. And he was paroled then at the end of the war in 1865, as many others were, and went back to his family in Alabama. And of course, the country was destitute. Everything was gone, and was here too, except the Yankees didn't come through here like they did the states on the coast. But he had a hard time during the Reconstruction, like everybody else did. And so he heard all these stories about Texas, and they decided to come to Texas. And they figured it would take 6 weeks to get here by wagon train. And this was in 1869 now, 4 years after the Civil War ended. And his family and all of the relations, it grew to be, let's see, a wagon train of 28 families. So that was quite a group to come to East Texas at one time. And they landed in Texas and were in the Snap community. And you know where that is.
Yes.
By November 1869. They were hurrying to get here so they'd be ready to put in a crop. They had to make a living as soon as they got here, you see. And they settled, I guess connections helped them provide a shelter. And that first year, they lived in Snap community. And I ran into a little quotation from tradition of the family that I thought was kind of interesting. The quotation was that Daniel had a wife, 5 children by then, an old father, and a stepmother to bring with him to support. And he had $1.50 in his pocket when he got to Pinole County. $1.50 with that kind of family to support. We'd just about have a nervous breakdown if we were to that stage. And tragedy struck them right away because that old father died within 2 months. And Daniel had depended on his father for advice. So he and those boys had to hit it to raise a crop. And they really worked and made a bumper crop. Now the old man is buried, his father is buried in 6 Mile Cemetery. And that's out there in the Snap neighborhood, you see. And they made a bumper crop, and when he paid his bills, they had money left. And he says, I'm ready to buy land. And he'd found just the place he wanted, out here west of town in what is now the Macedonia community. In fact, later he gave the land for that Macedonia cemetery. Not old Macedonia, but the present Macedonia. You know, there are 2 Macedonia cemeteries. There's an old one that was pre-Civil War times, and then the one behind the church there is the one now. So that's the neighborhood where they established their home. And Dr. Chadwick says that there are, I believe, 6 different deeds in the courthouse, I didn't look them up, that he had bought tracts of land and expanded his holdings out there to where he was one of the greatest, or one of the wealthiest farmers in the county. And he had 7 sons and 1 daughter. And he was very generous with them, very generous with communities. In this old 1909 newspaper, the East Texas Register that I mentioned last week, there are write-ups, pictures of their homes, and the newspaper says they were always willing and glad to participate in any community activity for the building of the community. So they had a part in all of our development. And with those 8 children, and 7 of those 8 children established their homes in this county. Only one of them left the county, and that was one of his sons that went to Fort Worth. And the rest of them established homes and families here. So you see how far-reaching that many, 7 children from him, would rear their families here. What a massive descendancy that would make. And they were contributors to wherever they settled. And so several of them settled in the area around where he had settled up there. And then one of them, the oldest son, John L., bought his land out here on the road to Marshall. I remember before that road was widened that Chadwick house was right against the road. It had to be moved for that road to be widened. You probably don't, I don't remember when it was moved, but the barn was on the right-hand side of the road and the house on the left-hand side, and they had a windmill right by the road. And this was one of the few windmills that was still here when I can remember. And all that had to be moved to make room to widen the highway. It was so close. But that was John L.'s property there. And we know his children. Hurst Chadwick was his son, and Miss Jenny Mae Chadwick. And he had just the 2. Now, these then were grandchildren of the Daniel Chadwick who settled here first. Mm-hmm. And then this Dr. Chadwick that wrote this story goes more in details about his father's family. See, the Daniel Chadwick we've been talking about is his grandfather. Mm-hmm. Now, his father was also Daniel.
Okay.
D.D., or Daniel Davis, or Daniel II in Panola County. And he goes into greater detail, of course, with that family. But the children of Daniel Sr. That settled in this county, all but one, as I said, one of them, and I have his name here somewhere, Henry. Henry settled in Fort Worth. Established his home in Fort Worth. All of the others were Panola Countyans, and so they have a lot of descendants in this county. Their children and their children's children, because they're several generations since. There was John L., there was Daniel Jr., or Daniel Davis, Henry Clay. Henry Clay is the one that went to Fort Worth, and Francis Marion, and one girl, Nancy Anna, who married Obby Davis out at Clayton. So her family settled there, see. Mm-hmm. And William Sandy, and I remember Sandy Chadwick in my youth, had gins and sawmills, any kind of business you mentioned, Sandy Chadwick was in it. But he was mainly known for putting in experimental farms, following government recommendations, and improving farming, as well as everything else that he did. So they had a great influence in this county. Then there was Benton, or Ben they called him, and Linwood. And all of these, as I said, except Henry Clay, reared their families here. And so they are very well known in this county. These families all prospered, really. And Dr. Claude said that his grandfather, Daniel Chadwick Sr., lent $2,000 to Mr. Teeb Hawthorne for Mr. Hawthorne to start his business.
Is that right?
And that he lent money for the building of Carthage School. Now, he did not say which building it was. I asked the question of myself and tried to find it. Which building? It had to be the original three-story building that faced what we call College Street and was called Male and Female College. That had to have been the building that he lent the money to build. But you see, he'd established a pretty good background because he came here with $1.50.
Outstanding background.
Very outstanding background. And he and his family did it, but it had to have been that one because he died before the next ones were built. So that's the reason I decided on that. Now, his children, Daniel D. Chadwick is actually the father of Dr. Claude, who wrote the story. And he had 7 children himself. And Dr. Claude was the youngest. And Dr. Claude says in his memoirs here, and Dr. Claude's still living, but he's retired in Tennessee. But he said that every one of those, now that some of them didn't reach maturity, but everyone who did received a university education. Degrees I'm talking about. And among those were Miss Gladys Chadwick, who taught in our high school, and Mattie Lou Chadwick, who also did some teaching. And Noble Chadwick was the last one on the home place out here. And Claude Simpson, of course, who got his Ph.D. and continued throughout his career to be a university professor. How we used up our time, haven't we? Well, he says that Daniel Chadwick Sr. amassed a great estate in Pinole County, one of the county's wealthiest citizens in 1900. And he had a general store, a cotton gin, a grist mill, a large cotton farm, and he lent money like a bank. He ran his own bank and lent money. And he was generous to his children, and one incident I'll tell, and we'll end today. He had all of his children invited for a dinner at his house. And when they turned up their plates, under every plate was $500 as a gift. Now, with 8 children, that's a pretty good chunk.
Yes, it is.
Not many of us ever reach the stage where we can do that for our children.
No.
Just surprise them with $500. And his wife said, well, Dan's doing so well. He doesn't need it. He already has his farm going so great. And Dan said, oh, I can use it. So this was the kind of generous supporter of everything that was for good in the community. And that's the kind of people we need to know about.
Which all evolved from $1.50.
$1.50. This is amazing to think about. Came here with a family to take care of and $1.50.
We must travel on. This
has
been one more interesting program again.
Well,
Thank you.
We have interesting people in this county.
We really do.